I started posting videos about board game design just over a year ago. Since then, this awesome community has grown and we just passed 1,000 subscribers. Thank you all so much for being here. I've really enjoyed sharing my board game design journey with you, and I'm so excited to see where this channel goes from here. So as a thank you for helping me get to 1,000 subscribers, I have 2 gifts for you. The first is I bought a microphone. I know my sound quality hasn't been the best over this past year, but just like my board game design prototypes, I wanted to make these videos as quickly and cheaply as possible when I was first starting out. But now that I see real potential in this channel and I'm committed to continue to make videos for you, I invested in a microphone. So thanks for your patience on that, and hopefully you notice a difference in sound quality. And the second way I want to say thank you is with a giveaway. You may have noticed that this shirt has my logo on it. So I'm so excited to tell you that I worked with my friend Amanda, who's a graphic designer, to create merch for my channel. The design we came up with is my logo in front of a rose. I wanted a sort of classic tattoo sort of look. And then on the back is something I said in a video that I think is pretty cool.
The more games you design, the better designer you'll be.
So I'll randomly pick a winner from the comments of this video to win a free t-shirt. To enter, just watch the rest of this video, which will be clips of my best advice from this past year's videos, and let me know which quote you want to see on the next t-shirt. I'll pick a winner next Saturday, April 22nd, 2023 at 11 a.m. Pacific time, so be sure to comment ASAP. And if you want to buy my merch, I'll include a link to my store in the description of this video. Thank you so much for your support. All right, so now it's time for me to share the best advice I've given on this channel this past year. Let's do it.
I recently read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, and I found it really inspiring, and I wanted to share what I learned with you and how it applies to being a board game designer specifically. And I'm going to start with the idea of identities. So this is something that the author didn't focus a lot of time on, but I think it's one of the, or if not the, most important concept of the entire book. So this is the idea that rather than focusing on what you want to achieve, focus on who you want to be. So in the book, he says, true behavior change is identity change. You might start a habit because of motivation, but the only reason you'll stick with one is that it becomes part of your identity. So this is the idea that I'm not doing this thing because it'll get me closer to my goal. I'm doing this thing because it's part of who I am. So every time you play test your game or prototype your game, that is a vote for the identity of a board game designer. It is not just a step towards getting a board game published. So this brings in the idea of owning the fact that you are a board game designer. A lot of new designers do this, and I did this as well, where I called myself an aspiring board game designer, or I make games on the side, or it's my hobby, or in my free time I make games sometimes. I didn't own it. So the author in the book gives an example of a smoker. So someone offers someone a cigarette and they say, oh no thanks, I'm trying to quit. And then there's another person who says, oh no thanks, I don't smoke, or I'm not a smoker. So saying you're not a smoker is much more powerful than saying I'm trying to quit. So saying I am a board game designer is a lot more powerful than saying I'm an aspiring board game designer or I make games on the side. So a lot of people feel, well, I can't say I'm a board game designer because I don't have a published game. But the truth is, the moment you take an action of a board game designer, you are a board game designer. So if you just think about games and you think about making a game and you think about getting a game published, I would say you're not a board game designer. But if you ever take an action to make a game, to play test a game, to actually take action, the moment you take that action, you are a board game designer. And every time you take that action again, that's another vote towards this identity. So here are some actionable steps for this idea of identity. When you wake up and before you go to sleep, say to yourself, I am a board game designer. And now anytime you take an action, that's prototyping your game, playtesting your game, look at it as a vote for this identity of being a board game designer. Moving on to goals and systems. So creating a mindset that reinforces the identity of a board game designer, designate an area in your home as a board game design space. It can also function as something else, like my dining room table is also my board game design space. Have your prototyping supplies organized and easily accessible to your board game design space. For surrounding yourself with like-minded people, join playtesting groups and board gaming groups. The best way to do this that I found is at meetup.com. Sign up to attend a playtesting or gaming convention. Follow other designers on Twitter and Instagram. Including me, you can find me at Pamela's Game Design on most platforms. And for not requiring perfection. The author doesn't talk about this in his book, but I found an article about this on his website where he suggests adding the word but at the end of a negative thought. So say you have a pretty rough playtesting session and you think to yourself, this board game sucks. Well, how about you add the word but at the end and finish the sentence like, this board game sucks, but now I can decide if I want to continue working on the game based off the feedback I got or archive it, freeing up my time to work on something else. So now talking about action versus motion and quantity versus quality. So the author says, the most effective form of learning is practice, not planning. So be aware of how much time you spend in motion. So thinking about your game, planning your game, running through playtesting scenarios in your head, and focus more on taking action, playtesting your game, prototyping your game, but not spending all your time on making it look pretty, just getting a prototype done, getting it playtested, and see what happens. So then there's the idea of quantity over quality. This is an idea I've talked about in previous videos quite a bit, where a lot of designers, especially new designers, will focus all of their attention and all of their time on one game. But it is so true that the more games that you make, the better designer you'll become. So this is an important mindset shift, where you're focusing on creating a ton of different games and learning along the way and growing as a designer, rather than trying to make one game perfect. Today we're going through the ABCs of board game design. Analysis paralysis. This happens when your players are so overwhelmed by choices, or they're confused by the rules or the complexity of the game that they almost shut down. Now in your games, you do want players to make interesting choices, but you don't want to overwhelm them with so many choices that they suffer from AP. If you find in your playtest that players do have AP, you should make sure that you're explaining your game clearly and that they understand the rules of the game, that you're not overwhelming your players by so many different options that they just don't know what to do on their turn, or if the game is just so complex that players just can't wrap their heads around it. So AP is definitely something that designers should be aware of and look out for. Breaking a game. This means finding a design flaw that you can exploit to easily win the game, or that shows that the game is unplayable. I highly recommend playing your game through yourself to make sure you see any obvious design flaws in the game before showing it to others. Fail faster. This is a philosophy that a lot of designers have, including myself, where there's an emphasis on getting your game out of your head and onto the table as soon as possible, putting it in front of people, getting their feedback, and moving forward with that information. Doing this, you will most likely fail, meaning it won't go as smoothly as you had it in your head. But that's part of the process, and it's an essential part of the process. And the faster that you get to the failing part, the quicker your game will improve. IP, short for intellectual property. These are brands that publishers license to use in games, like Marvel, Disney, Star Wars. So if you want to design a game for a particular IP, I would say it would be best if you know that the publisher is actively looking for submissions for that IP, and ideally you would have a relationship with that publisher already. But if you've come up with a great game for a specific IP, I would seek out the publishers that license that IP. There can be several, and either try to contact them directly or find them at a speed pitch event and say, hey, I've developed this game based on an IP that I know that you license, and I wanted to show it to you and see what you think. There's also the other side of usually new board game designers worried about the intellectual property of their game that they've come up with. Quite a few designers spend money on patents and copywriting their games because they're worried that other people will steal their ideas. There are a lot of opinions on this topic. I will say that in my opinion, spending money on patents and copyrights isn't worth the money because they likely won't protect you anyway if someone steals your idea. Board game ideas are very tough to protect in that way. Right now, basically, all you can really do is let people know about someone who has stolen your idea. Never interact with them again. If they've put their copycat idea up on Kickstarter, reporting it to Kickstarter, trying to take it down. It is good to take photos and document your process so you can show that you have worked on this game previously and it is an exact ripoff of your game. But I will say in general, the benefit of collaborating, sharing, playtesting your game openly and freely far outweighs any risk of someone potentially stealing your game. I know this is something that I was worried about when I first joined the board game design community. I was worried about putting my idea out there to people beyond my friends and family, people who I trust. But you'll soon find that most people are so focused on their own games and trying to come up with their own ideas, the likelihood of someone completely ripping off your game and getting away with it are fairly low. With that said, I'm not a lawyer. If you are concerned about this, there is a lawyer that I would recommend reaching out to. I've worked with him before. He focuses on the board game and video game space. His name is Zachary Strubeck, and I highly recommend him if this is something that you're concerned about. But today I'm talking about physical prototypes. And I'm really going to be focusing on how to make prototypes fast and cheap. I'm not going to be focusing on the great part. You've probably seen that triangle of good, fast, and cheap. You can't have all three, usually. So I'm going to be focusing on fast and cheap because prototypes do not need to be perfect, and you should not be focusing on how they look. You really want to be focusing on how the game plays. So you just need to get something together as soon as possible, get it to the game, see how it plays. You want it to communicate the game clearly and be able to be played, but you don't need to worry too much about making it look perfect. Now, you won't be playtesting a game just once, seeing what works, what doesn't, make some changes, and you're done. That's not really how it works. There's a playtesting cycle. So you playtest a game, you make changes, you playtest a game, you make changes. You keep doing that over and over and over until you have a really good quality game at the end of it. And those changes that you make between playtests are based off the feedback that you get from playtesters and your own observations. Now, preparing for your playtest, you want to make sure that you practice explaining your game. Set up the game, pretend your playtesters are sitting there, and actually go through explaining how to play your game at least a couple times before the playtest. Most importantly, you want to have the overview and how to win the game at the start of your explanation. That's happened to me quite a few times where I'm playtesting a designer's game and I don't actually know how to win the game. Now, once your playtesters are there and you're about to play the game, make sure you write down everyone's names, first and last. I always make sure I do this, and then I keep track of all of my playtesters' names in a document for each game, because if the game gets published, I want to make sure I have all my playtesters' names so I can include them in the rulebook as an acknowledgement. Now, during the playtest, make sure you do not help players with strategy. If they have questions about the rules, absolutely you can answer those. Unless it's a blind playtest, then you want to refer them to the rule book and see if they can find the answer to their question. But really resist the urge to help people with their strategy of their game. You really want to see how people play it and how they figure it out on their own. But one of the main things to keep in mind is to let the playtesters lead the discussion. If they really want to talk about how the theme, they really didn't like the theme, it didn't work for them, but that's not one of your set questions, that's not one of the things that you really wanted to focus on, if that's important to the playtesters, it should be important to you. And one thing that can be a little uncomfortable to do, but I think is really important, is to lean into the silence. A lot of designers will pepper the playtesters with questions and not let any silence hang over the group at all. But I like to just sit back. If there's a moment of silence, it's okay. The playtesters are thinking, they're processing a lot of information. And I can guarantee you, if you just let that silence sit for a second, one or all of them will then have more questions, more comments coming at you. But if you then change the direction completely by asking a different question than what they're all thinking about, you might miss out on a lot of their insight. And one of the most important things to remember is do not argue with your playtesters' feedback. Don't try to justify things or defend things. Just take it all in, write it all down, and deal with it afterwards. So yes, write everything down, including things you don't agree with. So what are sell sheets? Sell sheets are one-page documents that designers give to publishers as a takeaway when they pitch their game to them. They summarize the most important parts of your game. Now, before we get started, I want to emphasize that you do not need to worry about sell sheets if you're still playtesting your game and you're not ready to pitch to publishers. I've seen this where designers are creating sell sheets for games that are still early in the playtesting process, and they're still making big changes to the gameplay. Sell sheets are marketing tools that are used for final or mostly final designs that are ready to be pitched. So don't jump ahead and spend time creating sell sheets when you really should be focusing your energy on testing and iterating your game. And the most important thing, when you follow up with a publisher, you want to definitely ask to be added to their email list of designers. A lot of them have these distribution lists where they send out their wish lists and different calls for submissions for game ideas. Definitely ask to be added to that list. They can always not add you if they don't want to, but it's definitely good to ask. And I'm on a few of these lists now, and it's really fantastic to have an ongoing pitching relationship with publishers rather than just a one and done. The more board games you design, the better designer you'll be. And I wanted to take that idea a step further and talk about the different games you can play in order to be a better designer. Being familiar with and playing a variety of games will build a solid foundation for any designer. Sometimes designers will stick to games that they know and that they like and might not realize they might have some blind spots of different kinds of games that they haven't played before. It's always good to continue to play different kinds of games and see what's out there and not just stick to one genre or one type of mechanic. I would suggest you head over to the mechanics list on Board Game Geek that lists all the different types of mechanics you can find in board games. Find a mechanic in that list that you haven't played before, click on it, learn about it, and then see the different games that use that mechanic, and then play that so that you can see what that's all about. So it's always good to play games outside your comfort zone, even if you're a more established designer. All right, so the first thing I would say to tell if your board game idea sucks is it's your first game. More likely than not, your first game is not going to be very good. Obviously, there's exceptions to this rule, of course. But if you decide that you want to become a baker and you bake a cake, your very first cake will most likely not be your best cake, and it might not even be a good cake at all. Just like when you try anything for the first time you do it, it's probably not going to be very good because you're inexperienced and you don't know what's already out on the market. You don't know if you're bringing anything new to the industry. You've probably never play tested before. So if you're brand new to something, it's more likely than not, your first idea is not going to be your best one. Just know that you're going to have to make a bunch of games, throw a bunch of things out there, and learn along the way and grow. And then eventually you will come up with something really cool. Number 2, if the game already exists. If you're inspired by a game, inspired by different mechanics and different things, and then you turn it into something new and unique, and you're adding a twist to it, you're making it different, then that's totally cool. The bottom line is, if multiple people are telling you that your game already exists, then that's something you should definitely listen to. The third way to tell your board game idea sucks is during playtests or after playtests, if there isn't that spark that you're looking for. The more games that you playtest, you'll start to recognize that little spark that you see sometimes, that little twinkle in the playtester's eyes that you're looking for that tells you, okay, I'm on the right path. And the last indicator I will talk about how to tell your board game idea might not be very good is if you have zero publisher interest. So a lot of people, if they don't get any publisher interest, will then decide, well, I'm just going to self-publish on Kickstarter or something like that. And I would say before you do that, really take a look at your game and think about, why am I not getting any publisher interest in this game? Are playtesters excited about it? Are they asking to play again? Are they asking, when can I buy it? Are they talking about the game to other playtesters? These are the sorts of things that you're looking for, that you need to have in your game before you decide to self-publish. If you don't have any of these things and you don't have any publisher interest, I would definitely be wary about trying to self-publish yourself, because all these different things might be telling you that your game just might not be good enough, and it might be time to move on to something else. So the first one I wrote down is focusing on one game for too long. If you only have one game that you're working on at a time, that has all your focus on just that one game. And if you are so in the weeds on it, it's not going to give you that perspective that you might need. And the second mistake that most new designers make is testing your games only with friends and family. They are absolutely amazing playtesters to have, but if they're your only group, I guarantee you won't be getting the breadth of feedback that you deserve and that your game deserves. And so it's good to get all different kinds of perspectives. And especially if you test with other designers, pretty much guarantee you, they'll tell you, well, this game reminds me of this game. Have you heard of this game? Have you heard of this game? And then you can go play those games and learn about how maybe your game is similar, how it might be different. You could even discover that, oh, my game already exists. So that's good to know. Move on to something else. Or change it and improve on it, make it different. But these are things that you might not know if you don't test with designers or people in the board game community who have that sort of insight. The third mistake that most new board game designers make is spending too much time and money on how a game looks rather than how it plays. And this is super important. You want to be spending as little amount of money as possible on your prototypes while you're still playtesting them. They're not a final product. And especially if you are planning on pitching to publishers, don't spend any money on art. Don't spend any money on graphics. The publishers are going to be changing that anyway. Just use clip art, make something quick yourself, placeholder art. If you're going to be self-publishing, only spend money on your art and graphics on your final product. And what's also helpful too is actually if you book a playtesting session. So if you RSVP to a meetup or you sign up for a convention, so you have a deadline for when you will be playtesting your game. So then you can't be spending weeks and months making your prototype look pretty. You just have to get something done and get it to the table. That actually leads right into number 4, which is not getting your game to the table fast enough. Not getting your game in front of other people to actually play soon enough. So the designer Sen Fung Lim, he talks a lot about this, about how he used to do this, and I did this, and I still do this sometimes, where you try to almost think a game to perfection. But that's just not how it works. Once you get your game in front of other people, I guarantee you it will go completely different than what you had in your mind. So getting something to the table as soon as possible will save you so much time and energy than thinking about it for weeks and weeks and weeks, trying to make it perfect in your mind. And so the 5th thing that I'm going to be talking about today is being defensive or ignoring feedback that comes up in playtesting sessions. So what I do is I take in all feedback and then I decide what I want to implement and what I'm going to not implement. That's up to you to decide. Yeah, so everyone's story will be different, but I'm sure that some things will likely be the same. The more you reach out to the community and get involved with other designers, the more you'll learn and the better designer you'll become. And if you do things that scare you, you'll always grow and learn a lot from them, and maybe even something great will happen from them. So I'm always learning, I'm on a journey, I'm still figuring things out, always trying to become a better designer and not letting fear stop me from reaching my goals.